Starting up another Intrepid Museum Virtual Astronomy live event here this afternoon, and I'm going to need some technical support from you back at home to get started. Apparently, the web host that normally has our nice little fancy landing page is down, or says it has partial connectivity issues right now, and I am unable to actually log into that and swap over to the copy of the site that embeds the live stream. So the live stream still works just fine. You go to twitch.tv/DasValdez. I know the name, geez, what are you going to do? But there's no problems with the live stream. We just need to make sure that people can get to the website and fix that here as soon as we can. So here's how I need your help. Since we're just spooling up here, I need you in chat. To tell me, can you get to that link? KerbalSpaceAcademy.com/intrepid. KerbalSpaceAcademy.com/intrepid. If you click on that, does that come up? And do you see a live embed of the stream, or do you see like a coming soon, free for all ages, virtual astronomy live, etc., etc.? I need some help on that if you could really quickly. Godzilla Train says there's no embed right now. Again, that's outside of my control. That is from that web host. The important thing is that we normally tell people to go there to that host. It's not like a little fly-by-night thing. It's actually squared space. But we are unable to switch that over to the actual live event. You were able to reach the site there, Animal, or Boris, you were able to reach the site as well. So it looks like people are able to get to the site right now, but they may not be able to actually see the stream embedded in the site. Master, you're not able to get to the site right now. All right, Splatty, you just get coming soon, not a live stream. Rocket Man, thanks for the resub. Appreciate you there. 26 months. That is going to be what it is. I am going to continue juggling that flaming scimitar here as we do the live stream. But that is sort of where we are with that really quickly. But anyways, as you know, the stream is going to be live. We should be on the front page of Twitch, etc., etc. I will resolve that as soon as I can. We're going to go ahead and make the show go on with another Virtual Astronomy Live here today. You can actually see I updated the lower third that we normally have. It now says Visualizing Spaceflight instead of Virtual Astronomy Live. It's actually some context as to what we're going to talk about. And then this is actually a screenshot of the website behind me right now. You can see the Intrepid Museum Virtual Astronomy Live Visualizing Spaceflight Experiences. What are we going to talk about today? Today we're looking at talking about the different tools that we have at our disposal to visualize spaceflight experience. It's like, Das, it says that in the title already. You're not telling me anything I didn't already know. We're going to look at some different tools that allow us to see our universe from different places, see our universe from different eyes. In fact, we're going to be talking about NASA's eyes on the solar system, eyes on exoplanets, eyes across the board. One of the apps that's put out at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, that allows you to actually fly around the solar system and visit different spacecraft. They've got exoplanets. You can visit different exoplanet systems that have been discovered and sort of visualize these different places that clearly you couldn't fly to in real life. Also, since we have the video gaming sort of theme here, we're going to be talking with the developers from Kerbal Space Program / Kerbal Space Program 2. We got them on as a special guest. A few of you will probably know a nerd who goes by the moniker Rover Dude. He's going to be joining us as well as a guest from NASA's JPL. Basically, the visualization producer from JPL that does NASA Eyes is going to be here, and Rover Dude from Squad / Private Division, developer, mod maker extraordinaire. He's going to be here as well, talking about these different ways that they help us experience spaceflight from places that we can't get to in real life. And then before that, you know, we always start off our shows with a pre-stream. We let the stream sort of spool up. In this case, hopefully we're letting the web host get us to the point where we can actually update the web event so that people can see it on that landing page as well. So we are going to be joined here shortly with Elysia Segal from Intrepid Museum. She's one of the lead... See, look, I faked myself out. She's the lead teaching artist and educator at Intrepid Museum. So she's going to join us in just a few minutes here and talk about some training, the way that astronauts have been trained back before we had all these crazy visualization tools. So now we've got computers, and your graphics card that's in your gaming computer, probably even your Xbox or your PlayStation or whatever, has more processing power than landed us on the moon, did all the simulations, etc., right? But back in the day, we had to sort of go through some real-world training because we didn't have the ability to just visualize things in simulators and all this sort of stuff. So we had to make physical physical simulators. So Elysia is going to be talking with us a little bit about that in just a second. But let's do one more status check and make sure we are good to go. Audio, video's good here. Mego, welcome to the stream again. Rocketman, you're back in as well. Mad, thank you for joining us. People, you're watching on the web. All right, good deal. People, you're watching on the web. Excellent. Splatty's still in here. Animal. While I do, I'm going to repeat this again, but once we get into the show, remember, this is a live show. This isn't like a pre-recorded sort of thing. And at the end of it all, we are going to have a section where we can do some Q&A. We'll get Elysia in here talking about spaceflight simulation and training. We'll get the main guests on. We'll get Bob and Jason from JPL and KSP Squad Private Division. There's like 8 different names there now, right? And then we are going to have a Q&A at the end of everything where you can ask some questions. I will ask, try to keep your questions on topic. I am not going to be able to tell you when KSP2 is going to release. Just don't even load it up. I don't have that information, and neither does Bob. So just keep the questions on topic. Visualizing spaceflight, how we transport ourselves to places that we can't get in real life, and we see our universe, we see spacecraft, planets, whatever it is, through different eyes. So it looks like everything's good. We need to do that sometimes. Oh, you're talking about the new flight simulator. That would be visualizing different types of flight experiences, Squishton. Thanks for coming to the stream. Thomas, welcome as well there. So let's do this. Let's hop over and introduce our first special guest with the Intrepid Museum. Please welcome Elysia Segal. Elysia, are you still with me here?
Yes.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good to be back.
Alrighty, so I was explaining a little bit of the technical difficulties we were having there. Chat's good. We're still live. People can still get to the stream, so we're just going to forge ahead with this. You were going to be talking with us about I sort of summarized some training, some spaceflight training. What do you got going on today here?
That's right. So today's Astronomy Live is focusing on the visualization of space and spaceflight experiences. And I know that sounds super complicated, but to break it down, we're basically just talking about how we can simulate the look or feel of being in space while being here on Earth, because it's very different. Now that could be through pictures or computer-generated games or graphics of distant stars and galaxies that we've never actually visited, like Bob and Jason are going to talk about later on, or something more immersive, like exploring the galaxy during a planetarium show or in a full-motion simulator ride or something like that. So really about how do we simulate these experiences both visually and physiologically, if we've never even been there to know what it's like, right? We've never sent a person to Mars, let alone some distant galaxy. So how do we have any idea what it's going to be like?
Yep. There's quite a few different things like that at the museum. I mean, you think a museum, you don't just show up and it's like, okay, here's a plane, there's another plane. There's a couple interactive experiences at the museum that have been opened in the past, I guess. I know you have like a pop-up planetarium sort of thing. I've seen some of the motion rides where you strap in and it's like, go on a jet ride or whatever.
Yeah, we've got simulators, we've got 3D movies, and of course the planetarium that I like to do those shows too. So, I'm in there doing that a lot as well. So of course we do try to give you the experience of being there. We've got a few recreations of some of the items as well. Yep. So things like the Gemini capsule, you can climb inside, and the cockpit of some planes. So it's a really kind of immersive experience.
Yeah, you get sort of a feel for how cramped things are sometimes. It's like, I think one of them is like an intruder or something. You can climb into the cockpit of an intruder and sit side by side with somebody, and you get a feel for sort of how it is to be in that space. But without further ado, y'all, again, this is Intrepid Museum's Virtual Astronomy Live. We're starting the pre-show here as people sort of dial in to the show, and we try to troubleshoot the technical issues with the website. I'll be working on that. Elysia, are you ready for your shindig here?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about all that stuff today, and I've got some really fun old NASA footage and photos to show you while I'm explaining all of that. So hit it, Nas. Let's do this.
All righty. So here we go. You are good to go.
All right. So first of all, it takes a lot of data collection to start with all of this. Obviously, scientists can look at light waves to figure out chemical compositions of stars or planets and how they move in relation to one another. And we've even used the Doppler effect, so bouncing radio signals off of something and then receiving them again to determine things like gravitational field. We did this with the lunar orbiters a long time ago, and that was part of what helped us to estimate that the moon's gravity would be a sixth of what it is here on Earth, so we could plan accordingly. But of course, it took a while. So knowing how to plan for all of this stuff takes a lot of work. And it's really just informed guesses, but they're important guesses gases because we're going to be sending people to the moon or another planet. So today we've got years of history and experiments that we can build upon to learn from. But if you think all the way back to the 50s and the 60s during the space race with the Soviet Union, no one had gone to the moon, and no one had even gone to low Earth orbit really yet. So how do you train and prepare someone to exist in those conditions when you've got no physiological data from previous astronauts? You're just making guesses. How do you simulate the sort of unusual things that they were expecting up there, but down here on Earth? Things like weightlessness and the disorientation of space, right? So we start with, of course, the qualifications to become one of the first Mercury astronauts in the first place. And so they all stemmed from the same criteria that was used for high altitude research flights, basically military test pilots, since that was the closest thing that they had to getting into space. And by virtue of the fact that they were still alive, they figured, yeah, those guys are probably pretty good at their job, so they'd be good astronauts too. So in addition to serving in the military, the qualifications were that you had to be under 40 and in excellent physical condition. You had to be less than 5'11" to fit in the suits and the capsules. And you had to have at least a bachelor's degree in a science or engineering field and be a qualified jet test pilot with at least 1,500 hours of flight time. Now, as you can imagine, that narrowed the field significantly. In fact, at the time, there were only 110 men that met the requirements, and then they whittled it down to 32 to advance before the final 7 were chosen. But the criteria did loosen slightly with each new class. But I also want to point out that the criteria of being a military jet pilot also completely eliminated the eligibility of any women, because they were blocked from doing that because of their gender. Now, that said, there were a few women that were able to still undergo the Mercury astronaut training at the time. One of them was an aviatrix and a race car driver who you see here named Betty Skelton. She was invited to complete it as a publicity stunt for a magazine. And then the rest of them were an unsanctioned secret side program that was run by the doctor who had developed the NASA astronaut training tests. And this group of women are now referred to as the Mercury 13. Which is another whole fascinating story on its own. And you're going to get to see some of the pictures of their tests throughout here today as well. So let's talk about some of this astronaut testing and training. What did it look like back then for those early missions? Well, in all, there were about 87 exercises, both physical and psychological, over 3 phases. Now, phase 1 involved testing the limits of the human body by simulating some of the conditions that they were expecting them to encounter in space. So again, they had no idea what was going to happen to the body. Maybe your eyes would change shape. Maybe you wouldn't be able to see while you're up there. Maybe you wouldn't be able to swallow. So they were really just making all of this up as they went, and also their flight plans. So they had a number of tests to withstand stress and pain, like they sealed you in a room and heated you up to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And in another, they had their hands and their feet in ice water for several minutes while having their blood pressure measured, seeing how you reacted. In one test, they shocked them with electrical pulses and they tested their reflex. And in another, they actually shoved a 3-foot rubber hose down your throat to monitor your digestion. So kind of uncomfortable stuff. They trained on treadmills and stationary bikes, but to an extreme. So things like keeping a steady pace to a metronome for 10 minutes and then simulating up and down hills, sometimes while even being hooked up to a breathing apparatus to test your lung functions and your oxygen intake, since that would be a precious commodity up there, obviously. And these tests were referred to as basically being the lung-powered equivalent of that game at the fair, you know, where you hit a sledgehammer on a scale to ring a bell, but they'd be breathing. Then they had equilibrium tests. This is Gus Grissom here to try to throw off their sense of balance doing a task, and also a tilt table test that tested their cardiovascular system and their dizziness in prone positions. So they lied down flat on a table and they measured their heart rate and blood pressure every minute for 30 minutes. And then they tilted them horizontal to 65 degrees and then back again, up and down, just like that. Then, of course, they trained on the Orbital Flight Simulator Centrifuge. Now, this was a capsule that was attached to an end of a long arm, and it simulated the G-forces that they would feel during the launch and the landing by swinging the capsule around in a circle at different speeds and tilts. So if you've ever been on the Mission Space ride at Disney World, they use the exact same principle to simulate those G-forces of takeoff and landing on the ride. They spin you around that room on an arm. It's just like that trainer, only on that ride, it's only about 2.5 times gravity, whereas Apollo missions actually were feeling about 8 Gs. So again, a little different. This is some footage of John Glenn, Gus Grissom, and Alan Shepard on that trainer. And as you can see, they are really taking it. I think the most someone has ever gone through is something like 14 Gs. So that's 14 times your body weight is what you're feeling, and all on your chest. Now, one of the things that they also thought might happen was that when the capsule ejected from the rocket booster in space, that it might start tumbling around really fast and give the astronauts vertigo and mess up their sense of balance. So to test this, they took some super cold water and they squirted it into their ears to freeze their eardrum, which would induce vertigo and then make them lose their sense of balance and see how long they could cope and recover. So there's a picture, there it is, of John Glenn and Scott Carpenter trying to walk on a balance beam after that. And Scott Carpenter's not doing so well. Then, of course, along those same lines, we had the famous MASTIF simulator that stood for Multiple Axis Space Test Inertia Facility, to simulate this idea of the capsule tumbling around in space. So this was a giant 21-foot rig with 3 metal cages allowing you to move in pitch, yaw, and roll all at the same time. And then at the center was a replica of the Mercury capsule seat and a hand controller. So the trainees would use the controller to try to regain the control of the capsule while everything spun. And apparently the first time Alan Shepard rode it in 1960, he instantly turned green and hit the kill switch to make it stop. That's our first American astronaut in space. Now, the MASTIF is similar to the multi-axis trainer, which is probably the first thing that people think of when they think of astronaut training you see here. But that one was never actually used for astronauts. It's more of a novelty just for space camp. Now, a lot of these were done because, again, they just didn't know what would happen to the human body. So it was over preparation. And then after a few flights, they realized some were probably unnecessary and got rid of them. So phase 2. Now, phase 2 had psychological exercises, IQ tests and anxiety tests, inkblot tests, all of these questions to provoke and annoy the astronauts or to get them to dig deep into their personalities. And this was important to make sure they could stay focused and calm in stressful situations, and also to make sure that, you know, they weren't going to freak out in a high-risk mission. Later, of course, when they were teamed up in Gemini and Apollo, they wanted to make sure that they could deal with long periods of time in space with people. But the Mercury 13 also experienced an extra test, a sensory deprivation isolation tank that was designed to stimulate the weightlessness of confinement of a spacesuited astronaut in orbit. So they basically had to float in this big pool of warm body temperature water in a pitch black soundproof room. And previously, all of the test subjects, regardless of whether they were male or female, didn't actually make it past 6.5 hours without beginning to hallucinate. But Wally Funk, who you can see here, actually was so good at it, she set the all-time record for sensory deprivation at 10 hours and 35 minutes. Now, the Mercury 7 astronauts didn't do this experiment. Instead, their isolation consisted of 2 3-hour stints in a small, dark room with padded walls and a pad of paper and a pen. Not really the same, but that's what they considered to be good enough, I guess. But John Glenn apparently ended up writing poetry and lists of things that he could do in the dark, and Wally Schirra just took a nap. Now, later on, the doctor who worked on these tests said that they were ridiculous and they weren't meaningful in any way because they didn't really represent weightlessness and they were allowed to do something. But in regards to the isolation tank that the ladies did, he said that spending 2 days he said spending 15 minutes in that was the equivalent of spending 2 days in that dark room. So Wally Funk really spent more like 84 days in isolation with her 10 hours. So pretty impressive, I have to say. And that isolation chamber situation was just kind of ridiculous, I think, for the guys as well. Now for phase 3, it involved a lot of training in regards to stressful situations and how you reacted. So they had a number of fitness drills that they did, running, sit-ups, chin-ups, climbing over walls, stuff like that to make you keep going, even though you wanted to pass out. I basically hit that point after 3 push-ups, so I don't think I would ever survive that. They had an altitude chamber test where they stuck 18 needles into your head to measure your brain activity and then strapped you into a seat in a plane and then did all these death-defying feats at 65,000 feet to see how you reacted. And then survival tests training. So something went wrong on reentry during your mission, you could end up landing anywhere. So this training was about surviving in the jungle or in the desert or in the water, which is where they were supposed to land. Now, the Dilbert Dunker is an excellent example of the Navy water survival test that they did. So it was a replica of an aircraft cockpit that the trainee would sit in, and then it was shot down a 45-degree ramp and turned upside down in a pool of water to simulate a crash landing into the ocean. So you had to then be able to unharness yourself and get out of your cockpit and come up for safety while you were underwater. And then, of course, underwater training too. So the neutral buoyancy simulator is what they called it, weightlessness really. And they basically put you in a giant swimming pool with an aqualung and your big heavy flight suit, but weighted accordingly so that you didn't rise or sink. It was a neutral to simulate the weightlessness in space. They also, of course, used the Vomit Comet, the plane that they dubbed that, to simulate weightlessness by flying in these sharp parabolas up and down. And that would put you in free fall for about 20 seconds at a time. And a version of this plane is actually still used today for training. And of course, there's private companies that also take people out if you're so inclined as a civilian to do that too. And then, as you would imagine, lots of studying too. So onboard systems, mission objectives, celestial navigation, physics, engineering, all the experiments they were going to do in space on each mission as well. And then they also had to maintain proficiency in flying on military equipment as well. So there was a lot of training every week on the T-38 Talon, which we happen to have at the Intrepid Museum on our flight deck, and training simulators too. So they had early versions of flight simulators for both the planes and their spacecraft, and they spent a lot of time in those because, of course, they'd be spending a lot of time in the real thing. Now, the moon missions, for instance, had additional training since they'd be leaving their capsules and operating the LEM, too. So they built this large-scale terrain and a rig for helping them prepare for more stable liftoff. And later missions trained on sample collection on the moon's surface, too, outside. Now, the shuttle era was next, and largely through today, they significantly eased up some of the requirements for astronauts with the inclusion of roles like the mission specialist and the payload specialist, who, instead of pilots, could be scientists and researchers, and also because of the reduced G-forces that were experienced in the space shuttle. So ASCAN, or the Astronaut Candidate Training Program, began in 1978, and it's typically completed in about 2 years. It includes 16 different basic training courses in things like life support, orbital mechanics, payload deployment, Earth observations, medicine, space physiology, like you name it, everything they throw it at you. And some of the training is similar to the old school stuff, so still things like tilt tables like there, survival training, of course, and they still spend a lot of time flying in that T-38 training plane too. But a number of things are also updated. So, for instance, they now have more advanced centrifuge that can reach up to 20 Gs, although I don't think they've ever put someone in it that much. Their Vomit Comet is an updated plane now as well. And they've also figured out ways to simulate partial gravity. So if you were working on the moon, for instance. And now there's also, of course, the giant neutral buoyancy lab, which contains a pool. It's the biggest pool in the world. And it's got a full-size replica of the International Space Station inside of it. So a lot of training in there. Like their predecessors, the shuttle-era pilots also used a number of simulators to experience what it'd be like to pilot the space shuttle. And of course, today they still have simulators of each new vessel that they've used, like Soyuz here, and also Orion. Now, virtual reality, though, also is something that has become increasingly popular to help really immerse the astronauts into their world of space. And in fact, NASA has a whole virtual reality lab that simulates visualizations for space, including things like pressure and lighting and mass, inertia, everything like that for spacewalks and for ISS training. And now they even use VR technology underwater in the neutral buoyancy pool sessions also. So currently, right now, a 6-month mission to the International Space Station would take you about 5 years of training. And there is some speculation even that as we reach the next phase of space travel with longer missions to the moon or Mars, they might even use the ISS as an astronaut training facility in itself before jumping off. So I know you all are wondering today, if you want to become a NASA astronaut, the basic requirements are to be a U.S. citizen. You have to hold a master's degree in a STEM field, followed by 2 years of relevant professional experience or 1,000 hours of pilot time in a jet aircraft, and then pass NASA's astronaut physical. And there's our most recent graduating class of 2020, the Artemis generation. They just graduated back in January. So all of this is to say that, yes, we have things like Space Camp and the astronaut training experience at Kennedy Space Center for those of us who maybe aren't as lucky to be selected by NASA as candidates. But the actual work they do and the hours and hours and hours of simulations that they do are insane. I mean, it's very, very intense, but it's important because they're doing extremely dangerous work. So yeah, we've come obviously a long way since the Mercury program, but now that the space program has these very long-term, long-range goals, you're also going to start to see a shift in the training. It's going to be really exciting to watch it as it evolves, especially as technology is evolving and as more private companies are stepping in too. So I know I just threw a lot at you, but I think it's really fascinating just seeing how it all kind of goes together.
That was absolutely a lot. Alicia, thank you so much talking through all the different types of training and stuff. I was watching it and I kept wanting to jump in and I'm like, no, your mic's muted, Dust. You're not supposed to be jumping in right now. But I saw something in there that I've been to before, right? So at Johnson Space Center, they have this big dome, and it's where they train the astronauts to operate the Canadarm, right? It's a big sort of VR simulator thing, and it was my own spaceflight experience. I have at the same time zero spaceflight experience and thousands of hours of spaceflight experience because I've never actually been to outer space, but I've played a lot of Kerbal Space Program, right? So I've got all this sort of, I say video game experience, really. That's a stretch, DOS. But when I went to Johnson Space Center and I went into the dome where they had the joystick, the full-scale mock-up, these big projectors, and it looks like you're looking out of the cupola, the trainers that actually train the NASA astronauts were there, and they said, oh yeah, here's what you do, and then there's this, and there's a joystick, and we need you to do this. And I tried it, and the first time, I captured it. And they were surprised. They were like, wait a second, what? How did you got almost a perfect score the first time you did that? It takes astronauts however much time to get a score like that. And I said, don't act like I'd never done this in Kerbal before.
You're natural.
So it's really cool. I mean, all the different ways that they train that you were going through, all back historically, the moon programs, Apollo, Gemini, all that sort of stuff, and then what we do these days, and then some of those experiences have become more and more accessible at our homes. You're at home and you've got a computer that has a graphics card or whatever, and you load up a space game, or you go to a website that lets you fly around and look at stuff. We are today probably even more able to get those sorts of experiences than ever before because of the technology, don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, these simulators and things that we grow up with these games that sort of mask science in a way. There's games where you're like launching bubbles or something, and it's like you can see the trajectory of things going. And I know, they're going to be talking a little bit about that later. Jason was talking about, having their all the missions of NASA that they have in his program, and they have to calculate those sorts of things to be able to visualize them. I think it's very natural for our generation. So it's really, really exciting with these new classes coming in, because this is, I'm guessing how old you are, but, assuming they're around our age, whatever that.
I shaved recently. I look a little bit younger.
But but thinking about that, we are now growing up with the internet. We are growing up with all of these amazing science STEM things at our fingertips, these amazing games like Kerbal, right? So having all of that is really only opening doors and opening minds. And it's really exciting, all of the opportunities that are available now to the next generation. And
I say this quite often. I say this all the time. It's when you interact with a computer, you're using a mouse and keyboard, using a joystick, something like that, and you're playing a video game. I'm going to say it. When you're playing a video game, you can actually pick up real-world skills that may translate to something that we need in the future. Operating the Canadarm, driving a rover on Mars, constructing some sort of construction robot on the moon, all these sort of spatial awareness and using these interfaces and all this stuff. It may be something that in the future, when we have more and more people living and working in space, are actual skills. You could get a job in doing that stuff maybe one day. So, Elysia, thank you so much for joining us here for the pre-show. Again, y'all, this is Elysia Segal. She is with the Intrepid Museum. Not her first time over here on Intrepid Museum, Virtual Astronomy Live, lead teaching artist and an educator for the museum. Elysia, thank you so much for the time today and talking us through that. We appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks so much. Have a great Astronomy Live.
All righty. Good deal. We'll see you next time.